This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hey, this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in the Gem City of Dayton, Ohio. As a proud sponsor of this episode, we are happy to help you with all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs. Visit CornellStudioSupply.com for 20% off the largest ceramic book selection of all time. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters by potters.
This episode is sponsored by Monkey Stuff. Monkey Stuff makes things for makers. We're inspired every day by the craft and creativity of makers, and design and manufacture tools and accessories to try to make your making life a bit more delightful. Our products are designed in California, by makers and for makers, and manufactured in the USA. Check out our line of pottery accessories and tools at monkeystuff.com. Follow us on Instagram to see what we're up to in our studios, and keep on making great things.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 552 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I'm talking with Ruth Easterbrook, whose functional forms are decorated with layers of inlaid glazes that melt into floral patterns. In our interview, we talk about her recently finished residency at the Clay Studio, where she's been for the past 5 years, understanding her capacity as a maker, and using repetition to refine the color relationships in her patterns. If you'd like to see examples of her work, you can check out her website or go to ruth.easterbrook on Instagram. Also wanted to mention that I'll be heading down to Airmont next week for the Utilitarian Clay Symposium. That's one of my favorite gatherings of potters. It happens every 4 years, and this is the first one since the pandemic. So I'm looking forward to seeing everybody down there. I'm going to have t-shirts for sale as well as posters for free. So if you're going to be there, let's get in touch if you're interested in one of those. I did want to take a minute and mention a workshop that I have coming up in 2026. I know that seems like it is far away, but I'm happy to be going down to St. John Pottery in the Virgin Islands to be teaching a workshop with Stephanie Seguin. That's going to be on interpreting the flora of St. John, and it's going to be happening May the 16th to the 23rd. If you'd like to find out more information or to register for that, you can go to stjohnvipottery.com/workshops. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview.
I graduated Syracuse in 2007, and I went to my hometown afterwards, where I did an apprenticeship at a pottery called Hoyman Bro Studios, which is now just Jan Hoyman Studios.
And this was Doug Bro.
And
also.
This was with Doug Bro. Doug was not present at that moment because he was actually finishing up his grad school at Sacramento and transitioning into the teaching role. Before me, he was much more present and would work a lot with the apprentices, but I was trained by the former apprentice, and so I kind of jumped into that role, which was a lot of good, practice makes progress. I started throwing standing there. I became very confident in kind of the foundations of throwing and loading kilns and glazing, and a lot of that I still kind of work with. Talking about burnout, I do feel like I got to a level of burnout because I went into there because I didn't know what else to do, and then it really took me, you're just kind of chugging along, And I was at a place where I couldn't really save up money. So it was this like big question of like what to do.
We'll include all this, but let's start talking, or you explain what their body of work was, because they made a lot of pots, but they're actually like a lot of decorated pots, which is not that common in the production world.
Yeah, well, and to even think about like what my role was there. So their pots were very directly inspired by British like earthenware pots that were slip decorated. Then they would do almost like a reverse Myalica, where they'd use a lot of colorants and decorate on the slip section. And then I would glaze a clear glaze over that. And so it was, in the end, it looked very British, exposed red clay on one portion of it, the white slip being where like it was decorated. Fired to, I think, cone 1. I believe they started kind of building their business together after being in England. So there was a very direct connection with that.
And having your education at Syracuse is very progressive. Like you're a freshman, you take this class, you're a sophomore, like it's step 1, step 2, step 3. But then the business world and learning in an apprenticeship, it's more circular, or at least I think of it as circular, in that you're learning entrepreneurship, you're learning technique, you're learning all these things at once. Transitioning between the two, did you have any thoughts or sort of realizations as you were participating in it?
From my time kind of working at Hoyman Bro, I took away that wasn't the goal. I think I didn't realize that. Like I thought, oh, you are a potter, you want to be a production potter. By doing it and just seeing how much you can almost be, the pots take over and now you have to make them, and there's not that much flexibility to be an artist within that. I think that's where I was like, okay, how do I become more of the studio artist that has, lines of work that gives you freedom to change it over time, more than figure out one thing that people know you for, and now you have to make that same kind of design or line forever, whether you're fully in it or not. So that was one of the takeaways from just being part of that grind of like, doing that. After that, I know you've also interviewed Whitney Smith.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so I moved to Oakland and I started being Whitney Smith's apprentice or assistant. And there I learned a lot about the business side, because she was super savvy at a time where online sales were kind of not that common, but she had got her in with Etsy and she had down the system. So it was a very big contrast of kind of the more old school apprenticeship pottery that I just worked 3+ years at. And then I think it was like a year and a half with Whitney, where it was much more dialed in and fulfilling online orders. And she had such a precision of wanting things done a certain way. And I still, to this day, the way I use the metal rib to clean up glaze drips and stuff, that's from Whitney. Like I learned a lot of stuff from that time there. But this is where I think of my career in kind of 2 parts. And there's the first big part, which starts for me after graduating in 2007. I was an apprentice, I was an assistant, I was an intern, I was a student, and it wasn't until 10 years later that I kind of even called myself an artist or like thought of myself as an artist, but I'd gained all these things along the way that are still with me now. But it was in 2014, I went to Penland School of Craft for the spring concentration. And it was with David Eichelberger, and it was only hand building. So it was very like familiar, but brand new, where I had not done hand building really at all. It was low fire. It was putting terracage on things and starting to scrape. So this was like, for me, this big kind of shift. And I also, Penland is such an amazing place because I started seeing artists do the things that I wanted to do, like living proof that artists can have careers and thrive and like do these things. So for me, that's where I started applying to things and putting myself out there. And like, that was kind of this shift from, I guess, the supportive role to more of a leadership role.
Yeah, and feeling confident that you can trust your own decision making, I think, is a big step in any artist's life. And we were talking earlier about like you're at the end of a 5-year residency at the Clay Studio, and you're going to set up the thing that you've wanted, which is an independent studio. But one of the things you mentioned is, do you aim really big? Like, do you accept that dreaming is a good thing, and you get like a, I don't know, 10,000 square foot place and get other people to join you, or do you just get a 1,000 square foot place that you can pay on your own?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're going into this new transition that's happening now, tell me about how you're judging sort of the logical parts of those decisions versus the like gut feeling of like, oh God, is this going to work?
I think in the end, it really comes down to like financial ability. And so much is rooted in that. But I want to give myself a little buffer to do the bigger dreams, but in a smart way. So I have found a spot. It is smaller than one of the smaller places, but the price is right. So it just gives me time to be independent, but it's not the big fall that it could be if it was bigger. And I guess it's almost like little training wheels. Like, okay, let's see what this year looks like with making this doable rent each month. And maybe next year when this is up, I'll look for something a little bit bigger, where there were a lot of bigger options. But then I was like, oh, I need a business plan to go with that. And I am at a point right now where I'm trying to spin all these other things. I need time for that business plan when I'm not in this exact moment. So I think that's where the bigger space and sharing it, then I was thinking of like, okay, what are the different ways of sharing it?
And do you plan to stay in Philly, or where are you going to go?
I'm staying in Philly. So being a 5-year residency, I'm one of the final people to do that. But 5 years is a long enough time to meet somebody and move in. And so I am now living with my boyfriend here in Philly, which is kind of the grounding. It's the like, okay, now let me set up studio, find the ways that Philly can support me, because I'm living here now, where in all previous times it was less about that. The where I lived was probably the more flexible thing. It was like, where is the opportunity? Where is the studio? And then I'll travel for that. So this was a different set of kind of parameters that I was working with.
I wanted to ask you a couple financial questions. Are you comfortable talking about money?
Yeah.
When you're striking out to get your first studio, are you thinking like, okay, it's X amount of money, so I need to make X amount of pots per month to make that amount of money? Or like, what's your formula in your head that you set your budget by?
My first big question is, okay, what is doable at all with knowing right now I've not been paying any rent. And so there's like a huge jump from zero to anything. The lucky thing is I am living with my boyfriend. So in all the past, I've had to like rely on just myself to like pay my rent. So if I like fall short on a month, I am lucky in this particular opportunity where I know I won't be homeless or, that kind of thing. So that gives me a little bit of bravery within that. The next step will be figuring out how many pots do I need to make in this month. But I, right now, haven't put those numbers to paper. The place I found is $500 a month, and that seems doable. So now with that number, I think I do plan to set up studio like shop updates and like potential goals that I can control, that then I have an expectation of money coming in and out. And those are the things that I plan to tackle in the near future. But I've been so focused on like the deadlines now. So this last spring, all the things I said no to in the fall, I put into the spring, which means I've been chasing deadlines for the whole spring. So I really haven't had that much time to look at like future numbers. But I knew the closer to zero I could be for my budget, the more doable it was. I did look at a space that was $900 a month. It had twice as much space. And I immediately was like, oh, with that much space, I could teach private lessons. I could host other things. It wasn't so much a space that I could like share it with another person, but it had more ability for that space to make other income. Where the space I have found, I'm kind of locked in that it really is going to be me working in the space, and it's going to be pretty tight as far as having my kilns in there, having potentially my packing station in there, having my full making. And I foresee that I will run out of, like, the space will then determine what I can make. And so those are factors that I kind of tackle problems as they come up, be that good or bad. That's a whole nother question. And I do know people who are more analytical would probably hear this and be like, oh my God, like, but for me, like I think I'm rooted in reality. So it's really hard for me to make a plan for something that is so far in the future that it's not that concrete for me, because I have my problems I'm dealing with now. So I can't have too many future problems and my current ones at the same exact moment. Otherwise, it really can overwhelm me. And when I get overwhelmed, I slow way down. That's how I process overwhelm. So I need to like really compartmentalize and do lists and really focus on what can I do now. And of course, the reality is the future is coming, but I will kind of make a plan. But then when those things come up, I deal with them.
Yeah, and I also think on the East Coast, $500 per month is not unreasonable relative to, like, you can teach a class at the clay studio and make that much in a month, or you can teach a workshop and get yourself a couple months worth of rent stored up. Because I always think about, well, let's say if you're in New York City and the cheapest thing you can find is $1,000 a month, then what do you do? Then do you wait tables? Do you do whatever? And what I like about the residency experience of hopping around is you've lived in a bunch of different cities and seen how people make it work in all these different cities. Would you ever consider moving like farther out into New Jersey where it's a little cheaper? Or, because I think we talked about this maybe at Asparagus Valley this year. It's like, do you live where the nature is and commute to the city? Or do you live in the city and then go hiking when you need to be in the nature?
So here, I've been in Philly. I moved to Philly for the Clay Studio residency. I did not move to Philly for Philly. And I know some people, the city is a big attraction for them. I like visiting cities. I don't particularly like living in cities. So this has been kind of a hard adjustment for me to embrace city living. It is something that I'm still kind of navigating, and my heart tells me the nature is where I want to live. But of course, there's so many factors of like how to make that work. So in the meantime, I'm going to make the most of where I am. And so the studio I found is walkable. And so I can build in less of that, like, okay, what are the advantages of living in the city? Oh, walkability, having cool shops. Right now, I do mostly commuting, which is commuting in the city is like the worst way to experience a city. So I'm really hopeful this new walkable studio will really help me embrace or enjoy the parts of the city that are kind of the advantages of living in a city. And then when I do get in the car, I can commute to the nature, and we'll see how that goes. But I find it very attractive to be more in proximity to the city, where you have the garage studio, and you have much more of a nature ratio, and that's a personal thing for me. The disadvantage is you're now kind of an island. You don't have as much of that, like just people in close by. So that's where I guess everything does have its pluses or minuses. And that's a huge part of growing up too, is listening to what is really important to you and trying to seek those things out, but then also compromising, because that is really hard to have everything just be exactly how you want it to be.
Well, I mean, we've talked about nature in the joy way of like being outside and hiking and things like that in previous conversations we've had. But also we should say for the listener, like your pots are decorated with floral patterns. So nature is the replenishing aesthetic influence. So living in a city like this for the last 5 years, how have you been able to feed yourself aesthetically when you're really probably not going to see it walking down the street here?
I seek it out, honestly. There are parks around Philly that are not too far of a drive, which is one of the cool things about Philadelphia in general, that like the Wissahickon is this giant urban park that's within the city limits, but you can feel like you're very far away. And it does have wildflowers, like at trout lilies. They have these giant little groups of them. And I've at this point starting to be like, okay, it's that time. And I like go and like try to find them, where when I was living in a neighborhood closer, and it would be more you'd stumble upon it because it's just part of your routine. So I have to seek it now a little bit more. There's also some pretty amazing different kind of organized gardens around here, like Longwood Garden is extraordinary.
They have the orchid show there, which I've been to before. That's like a world-class orchid show.
Every show they have is pretty extraordinary, which is like the scale of the greenhouses and the scale of the flowers. And yeah, it is. So those things, that's a kind of a special thing to the location. You have to make a point to get there, but you can get there and then replenish. So, yeah.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com. At what point did your work become surface-driven in terms of that you're becoming a decorator as opposed to just a potter?
I have always been a surface person. So I'm a kind of hyper-focus on different surfaces over the years. But I can look back to my very first pots, and honestly, here what I was just thinking was my first pots when I was in undergrad, but even before that, I was always into thinking about the surface in some way. So it started with wax polka dots, and they looked like snakeskin because I'd put wax polka dots on one glaze, dip it in a second glaze, and it would have kind of the snakeskin look. And those were in high school. And then I got to undergrad and I saw Minoan pots and they blew my mind. And I started putting like waves and scallops, very much like pulling parts of Minoan kind of design elements. And one of my professors, David McDonald, had these big tubs of on-gobe and showed us to do slip trailing. And I started slip trailing everything. I slip trailed like everything for a while. And then another stage, we were introduced to making bisque stamps, and I became like obsessed with stamps, and I made and stamped everything. And then I started combining slip trailing and stamping, and I did that for a long time. And then I was at the Hoyman Bros studio where they're doing slip on top of the red and the red earthenware. And so one of the perks of that was we could use the clay and slip while we were there. So I started doing slip and sgraffito and pushing out designs when I was there. And then I started playing with the glazing when I was with Whitney Smith. And I remember at that time, and this is one of those things, you see things in hindsight. But in that moment, I was laying out manually different glazes. I only did a few because I had very limited space. But I did start playing with laying out glaze at that stage. And there were a few pots that kind of showed little glimpses of like what I would do 12 years later, right? But you don't know these things. And a lot of times, so there was this stage in between. I rarely had a studio. A lot of times I was like working out of a cardboard box, like in my bedroom. Like it was a really small scale. So it was like, okay, what do I have? So then I would go and like buy a box of clay, and I was renting space in a kiln, and we were doing atmospheric firing, and I would use like the scraps of a different clay to like almost finger paint a design, and then the soda firing would like kind of do this atmospheric stuff. And I just kind of played with that for a while. There's like and that was at that point kind of starting to work with the surface, but thinking more of clay as different colors. And then it was the David Eichelberger, and that's where I started doing flower designs carved into the kind of with the sgraffito of the using different color terracigulatas. Yes, terraciges. So we do the colors and then carve the lines. And I did a whole group when I came from that. I kind of pulled from there, and I was doing the red clay with the terracige on there. And that was the work that I was doing when I went to Anderson Ranch to do first I arrived to do a class, and then I stayed as an intern. And, you just have every 2 weeks, actually how it is staggered, every week another artist arrives, and you just get inspired by every single person that comes through. And that's when I started playing with glazing, thinking of glaze as a window. And I would glaze an area and then put wax on it and then glaze around it and then clean back. And it was like a little rough, but for me, I was like, oh, there it is. That's the moment that I started trying to find this way of like putting glazes next to each other and thinking of what each glaze was doing, as far as being opaque or being clear or being runny, and once again, that was a very small scale, but I could see myself kind of try these different things out. But your question was surface, which has led, and this is where I can just see this like path of like almost obsessive, hyper-focused delight in each one of these things. And then it will full circle kind of come back, but each one kind of led, but was very influenced by proximity to different artists, proximity to material. All those factors kind of along the way.
And you talked about the masking process or the process of doing a glaze, waxing, and then glazing around. And your process now is like that on steroids, where you're...
It's the opposite too. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk us through how you conceive of the surface, knowing that it's floral in nature, but then what? Like how do you decide how to get the pattern onto the pot?
When I'm thinking of the surface, in a lot of times, I've already been thinking about the surface since I was making it. Because I think in pictures. I'm very visual, kind of thinker. While I'm making, I'm imagining what I'm putting on it. And I don't think everyone is like that, where I'm thinking like 20 steps ahead. I'm even thinking like what's going to be served on it with the design when it's in the kitchen, and then how it's going to fit in the dishwasher. Like, that's where my mind is in the studio. There's always this, but then I'm forgetful. So I'll make a thing, and then by the time I have it as bisqueware, I'll probably have forgotten what I was imagining when I was making it. And so then I'm responding to like hints of what I had planned. And it could be very different than my initial kind of thinking. So in some cases, and this was in grad school, I really had this kind of conversation of how the form supports the surface, and then how the surface is reacting to the form. And in the case of my plates, I've kind of really set up. There's like the plate is supporting what will be decorated on there. And these are the ones the flower kind of takes up the whole space and expands beyond the edge. So the plate is now the flower. But the flower didn't exist until the plate had first been there. And when I'm making those, I actually use my finger and I'll sketch out my future design on the wet clay. Then I'll cut it. Then I'll erase it. Then I'll turn it into a plate. And then when it's bisque, sometimes I'm like, what was I thinking? What? I know this is supposed to be a flower, but what was the plan here? And then it might be something completely different. But more often I can see almost a flash of the picture of what I was imagining, and then I respond to that. Versus if I make a vertical form, then it is more about how that glaze is going to stretch around it. I like to think of the glaze almost like leggings. They stretch to a body's form. The glaze is going to do a similar thing. So it's not stagnant decorating when I'm doing it. And it's going to do very different things on a vertical surface than it does on a horizontal. And so I can take advantage of that. Like if a pot has a really big belly, I'll often put like a big flower right at that point, because it's going to kind of stretch in a kind of an extra good way on that spot.
Well, talk to me about line weight in the patterns that you make, because one of the things I love is that you'll have, and we were looking at this earlier today, you'll have like a big bloom, but then you'll have like a really small stem that comes right to that, and then lots of little leaves. But then beside it, you'll have a flower that's kind of the opposite. Like the rhythm of the pattern is changing, even if it's on the same pot. How do you set up the focal point based off of line weight?
So the way I go about kind of laying out my design is I always think about the big design first, what I call my bold areas, which often are the bigger flowers. And those I use tape to mask off those areas, and I'll strategically put them as kind of the balancer of the overall shape, be it vertical or flat. I kind of lay that out. And so now I'm not wondering what I'm going to put there, because I already know. So once I put that there, then when I'm sketching out the design around it, I start thinking of everything in proximity to that. So I'm like, okay, there's a big flower. Does it make sense on this one for that big flower to have a stem and leaves? So from there, I've now kind of have a direction. Now from those stem and leaves, I don't want too much empty space. So now how do I wrap more delicate flower next to it? And I have my colors. Of course, they're not looking like those colors when I'm applying it, but I have them all in my head, and I have a guesstimate, because some of them can be a range of different things. So now I've got my big flowers to be a decider of certain colors. So now I want to balance out the little flowers based on what colors they will be. So at this point, I've been doing it for enough years that I have like a little bit of a library of like, okay, if I use this flower, it's going to be this color, and this color looks good with this one. But I also am always open to try something new. And the way you have to do that is you just do it. And you're either like, oh, that was a good idea. And I'm going to add that to the library. Or, nope, okay, don't like that. And now I have 500 grams of that glaze, and it will sit there until maybe another day I try it in a different way. And then I'm like, oh, I really like that. I rarely throw anything away. So sometimes what I made or found a glaze for one plan, eventually it comes back around and it is used in a different way that I didn't anticipate. But it's kind of just by proximity of it being around.
Well, this cycle of feedback, like working, getting some information, making some new work, getting some information, like this is the Potter way to work. But that is not necessarily a business model. Like that's an aesthetic model. So downstairs, you're working on a massive commission that's like 10 dinnerware sets, which ends up being a lot of pots and then some other pieces to fill in. So that's really financial. Like people like the work, they commissioned you to do it. Do you find with a project like that you have to resist playing it safe? Because financially, it's best to just get the commission done, get the money, and get it out. But as artists, like we want the feedback. We want the risk to be paid off by seeing new work. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's like the big conundrum of like being a artist and making a living versus being an artist and having what you're making just be the pleasure of it and being very like creative in the like experimenting. And I do try to find a way to do both those things. And honestly, teaching is really helpful to give myself that time of experimenting. I've gotten so many good ideas from my demo pots, where I think I give myself the freedom. I'm demonstrating, I like to say, a buffet of options. So I want to get them excited. This is not about making one thing. I want you to get excited about, you can do these 10 different things. And I'm like, actually, that's a really good idea there. Yeah. So I have seen more and more as I'm, like I have systemized parts of my studio practice to keep myself with the business mindset. So I have certain dimensions for certain forms, and I'll try to stay true to those so people have a consistent knowledge of, if they see it in person and they see it online, that it's going to be the same kind of product, right? I've wanted to kind of hone in the weight in these measurements more and more so that those things do have just like a understanding. But then when you're trying to like have fun, what I do is I just kind of give myself a little side time for that. And then sometimes the only side time I have is when I'm teaching. Recently, I did give myself, I think it was a week, just to do stuff that didn't make sense. And I had a lot of fun with that. I'm trying to think even right now what it was that I made. Oh, I do remember what it was. So I bought some of that like colorful grog, and I just stuck it in some of the reclaim, and then I just made some different things just to see like what it would do. They were all test pieces where like there was no like final product necessarily, but it was like, okay, let's see how much of this colorful grog is going to come through. That was the question. And then I can kind of have freedom of make whatever I wanted to make. I learned that it doesn't make any sense to use that much colorful grog because the amount you need for it to really show is a lot more than I anticipated. So that I learned something from that too. But I also had a lot of fun just in the freedom of making.
Well, doing that kind of thing, I think, staves off burnout, which can be a big part of all potters' lives. And the last time we saw each other before today was at Asparagus Valley. And you said, I can't remember what the events were, but you said, I think I took one too many events this spring. And it's a fine line, because if you have nothing, or I should speak for myself, if I have nothing going on, then I don't feel the drive and the purpose. But if I have too much going on and I feel overwhelmed, I'm, like you said earlier in the interview, I get stagnant. Like it's a little deer in the headlights. It's like fight or flight or freeze. It's like the freeze thing. So can you talk about knowing how much you need to ramp up creativity with your creativity, but also how to stave off a burnout?
I'm figuring it out. I think sometimes that's how you find out you've taken on too much, is by taking on too much. And I'm trying to take that experience and then apply it to the future. It is really hard to even play this, like, and we were talking about the financial kind of roundabout of like X amount of pots and that, but it's not as straightforward as that, because when you're making work, there's so many different ways that you're making work for different things, and then the money coming back to you in some cases is more predictable, in some cases is less predictable, some cases it's a smaller commission as far as the portion that you get. And you have to try these things out to feel out what works for you and where your work, finds the right people. So there is a level of like, let's see, which is really scary. And there is a level of like fear of the, like, if I say no too many times, I won't get the invitation again, or, oh, I, need this income, so I need to say yes. Oh, wait, now I don't have any time to make because I'm traveling too much. So I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer. I'm figuring it out. And part of that figuring it out is, like, I think we're at a kind of a change where the like shop updates for me as I move into this independent, I'm like, that I have the most control over that. So if I can now kind of prioritize those and then say yes to things around those and have a better sense of the how much time I then need to make the things. And that's where I go wrong, is I imagine. So when I'm working, time doesn't exist. I am blissfully unaware of hunger and time. So I'm like, oh, that only took me 4 hours when it actually took me 9 hours. So now when I'm budgeting time, I was like, oh, I can do that in 2 weeks. And it really should be 6 weeks. So that's exactly where I am right now, where I'm surrounded by bisqueware. And I'm like, how much time is it actually going to take me to glaze all this stuff? And yeah, there is a level of what I think versus reality. And that will definitely play a part in the burnout, in the planning, in the what you can say yes. And I'm hopeful with all these things, the more you do it, the more you learn from your mistakes or from your successes, and then apply that going forward.
What's funny to me that what feels internally like a mistake, like over committing to outsiders, looks like success. But it's a little bit of the life of the potter. Like you said it, like you don't want to say no too many times because you maybe won't get invited again, or just not even in a personal way, like, oh, I don't like them. It's just like people move on to different ideas and different shows. But it's so interesting watching your career progress, like as an admirer of your work, because what I see is like you're doing this roller coaster, but the work is just getting like amazing. And even like I bought pots of yours years ago that I love and look at every single day. The subtle differences of what makes the newer work a little bit better is things like color theory, which was one of the topics I wanted to kind of wrap up with. You've figured out the formula, or at least it feels like this, where you know the right amount of a really bright color to make the subdued colors work. And that's something I'm always trying to figure out. So how did you get fluency with color theory?
So I don't feel fluent in color theory by any means. I don't think I've actually, other than my freshman year of undergrad, we did have I think they called it 2D art, and color theory was part of that class. Honestly, when I get pots out of the kiln, I kind of follow gut feeling. How does this make me feel? Is it kind of like this? And there's this like, when it's off, and I can feel it in my bones. And I'll often, those pots I'll like keep around and look at and be like, why do I not like this? Like, and it's like a strong feeling of like something is not right. And so this is a really hard thing for me to like teach. I don't think I could teach a feeling like that, but there is like when it's harmonized, like I have a yellow that took me a really long time to figure out, a yellow that worked with my black, because yellow and black are really tricky together. I think a lot of times they can be too much like a bumblebee or a construction tape, or like there's all these things that we like put those two colors and then we apply this other thing to it, and it can be a little off-putting. So I honestly don't know exactly how it kind of got there, but I found that Rutile with the colorants did this thing to it where it now has like oranges and pinks, and those teeny little hints of those, and the yellow being not very yellow, but reading yellow next to the black. Like there was a harmony that I could feel. And then it was like, okay, this is now what I'm pursuing. And I remember being really excited, like, oh, I found a yellow that I like. I've also, even within my black, I've been playing with that. I've been kind of nudging it towards the blue. So it's becoming ever so slightly less and less reading black and more kind of reading blue. And then everything is bouncing off each other. And how I glaze, the most important glaze is the background. And then everything has to kind of respond to it. So I would probably, right now, I really like the idea of changing up the background, but I would have to change everything. So in changing the background, then it would be what color green for the leaves? That would be the next question I would ask. And it would need to be one that has enough of a contrast to the background that it doesn't get lost. And then it would be, okay, what are the big flowers? And then what complements those big flowers? Because I don't want them to be too close that it's like, what's the point? But I even have multiple whites. I have one white that's a little more kind of muddy, but it creates this big halo around the flowers because we're dealing with not just color here, but chemical reaction. And then I have another white that's much brighter, and then it has much harder lines. So sometimes I'll play with the two whites on one. And for me, same with even blues, I'm like, these are so different because they're doing these different things. I don't know if anyone else noticed those things, but these are the things that I'm thinking about. And the hard part is I have to imagine it when I'm applying it. So you just saw my studio space. If you could only like see what you saw through my eyes, I'm imagining, and I had even put them in little clubs of like, these have these flowers. And so therefore those flowers are going to determine that these are going to be these color. And I've set that up because I don't want to make a decision that then later on it comes out and it's wrong. And the thing is, I have put the wrong glaze somewhere, and then when I get it out, I'm like, oh man, like, but you don't know until you can see it outside of the kiln. But the color theory, like, there's a limit to glazing. There's a lot of colors you might want, but you have to work with what you can do. And I think that's part of the fun and the frustration. Like right now, it'd be really fun to have a really bright pink. And I do have my like one pink, and I bought colorant to try, but it hasn't worked.
And you also don't have infinite time, like there's no time machine where you go back, you fix the pink now, but you go back 6 months and reglaze the pie with the right pink. So by the time you figure it out, the whole cycle, changes again. But as a collector of your work, I love seeing that cycle, because things are it's weird. In my head, I think, oh, the work's getting brighter, but it's not. There's elements that have gotten brighter that makes the dark look darker. So the contrast has gotten higher, but the black is the black, or the green, whatever the base color, that didn't change. It reminds me of this John Gill saying, all colors work together, just some have to work a little harder. And I think that's like a smart perspective on color.
Yeah, I think he also says there's no such thing as a bad color.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think of that. I know Kevin Snipes is just down the hall, and he often is encouraging me to, like, don't try so hard for them to harmonize. Like, put something on there that, like, is agitating. And I'm like, well, it will happen. But, I'm seeking harmony. I'm seeking, my work is rooted in pleasure. And it's the pleasure, visual pleasure. It's that proximity, the like pick it up, feel it pleasure. It's the sharing pleasure. And visually, I want it to kind of have that, like your eyes, it's almost like a delight to kind of notice little things. And I hope that people that live with my work, like one day see something they didn't see. And they're like, oh, look at this little moment over here too. Yeah.
To wrap up, can you plug your website and then social media also so people can check out the work?
So my website is rutheasterbrook.com. My Instagram is Ruth with a period and then Easterbrook. And I think that's all of them.
Well, thanks so much. Good to see you today.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
I'd like to thank Ruth for coming on the show. It was nice to catch up with her, and I wish her well setting up her studio in Philadelphia. I did want to take a minute and thank today's sponsors. That includes Monkey Stuff, the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art, and Cornell Studio Supply. If your organization is interested in becoming a sponsor, you can get in touch at talesofredclayrambler.com. I'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.